Case study on environmental impact assessment for a selected project of renewable energy. Offshore wind farm, Hornsea 4, England. Presented by
Niusha Alinia.
Selin.
Mariana.
Ganesh.
Guided by Professor Dmitry Polekov. The contents of this presentation will include introduction and project description, scoping, environmental baseline, methodology of impact assessment, probable implications, and conclusions. Introduction and project description. In this first part of the presentation, we will see the background of the project, the location, the project features, the project justification, and the relevant actors. Hornsea is a project that includes 4 offshore wind farms. It is located in the east coast in the North Sea. It is considered a new generation of offshore power stations, and it's located further from the coastline than ever before. In this presentation, we will only focus on the most recent wind farm, which is Hornsea 4. Hornsea 4 is located 65 kilometers offshore, and it has an expected capacity greater than 100 megawatts. As we can see in the image on the left, Hornsea zone is located in the Yorkshire coast. And also, as we can see in the image of the right, we can see the exact location of Hornsea 4 in red. There are 2 main transmission technologies being considered for Hornsea 4. One is a high voltage alternative current, and the other one is a high voltage direct current. The project will decide which transmission type it will use during the detailed design. Both electrical systems are presented in this figure. The features will include an offshore wind farm that includes wind turbines, wind turbine foundations, substations, accommodation platforms, array cables and interlink cables, and current cable protection. It also will include an offshore export cable route that includes export cables, the high voltage alternative current booster station, and current cable protection. And also, it will include an onshore part that includes export cables, onshore substation, energy balancing infrastructure, and grid connection. The wind farm site area of Hornsea 4 includes 846 square kilometers. The closest distance to the shore is 65 kilometers, and the water depth is between 24 and 63 meters. It will have a maximum number of turbines of 180. The wind turbines, offshore substation, and the offshore accommodation platform foundations may include seabed leveling, ground reinforcement, and also the removing surface and subsurface debris such as boulders, fishing nets, lost anchors, etc. UK needs to meet the energy challenge published by the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. This challenge includes tackling climate change by reducing carbon dioxide emissions and ensuring secure, clean, and affordable energy. It also aims to meet objective number 7 of the Agenda 2030, which is to have affordable and clean energy. On the other hand, the Energy Act 2013 provides further commitment for the UK to achieve a low-carbon energy industry and incentivizes investment in low-carbon electricity generation. It also needs to follow the clean growth strategy that promotes clean growth as growing national income while cutting greenhouse gas emissions. The relevant actors are Ørsted, which is the one carrying out the project, Pincet Maçons, which provides legal advice through Hornsea 4 development, the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, the National Infrastructure Commission, the Secretary of State, of course the citizens, the fishermen, and many more.
Hello, I'm Selin. I will talk about scoping boundary, impact identification, potential effects on offshore. So, one key aspect of the approach to scoping is the initial identification of the likely significant effects of Hornsea 4, and it can be drawn from the wealth of the baseline data already available and the general consensus on the main impacts and effects of project like Hornsea 4. Let's continue with the scoping boundary. The scoping boundary is defined as the area within which the project and electrical infrastructure will be located, including the temporary work areas. The boundary combines the Hornsea 4 array, onshore substation, and landfall research areas, and a buffer zone applied to an indicator center line for the potential export cable corridor. The buffer zone is 1 kilometer either side of the indicative potential onshore export cable center line and 1.5 kilometer either side of the indicative potential offshore export cable center line. You can see the scoping boundary in the right figure. In the impact identification part, there are three impacts examined: potential effects offshore, potential effects onshore, and cumulative effects. The physical process issues of Hornsea 4 are being evaluated for each of the main stages of development, which are construction, operation, and decommissioning, with the scale of effects considered relative to the baseline condition. There are 10 different categories for potential effects on offshore, and I will mention them in the next slides. So let's start with the first impact category, which is marine geology, oceanography, and physical processes. All the impacts are identified by impacts register method. I will mention only one project activity in each category due to the limited time. So in operation phase, the project activity and impact is turbid wake effects from foundations interfering with Flamberg front. It has minor magnitude and medium importance, and is likely significant effect is Flamberg front is relatively close but also limited in position by deeper water to the north. As there is also a commitment to the implementing the embedded mitigation measures, the third column, they are considered inherently part of the design of Hornsea 4 and therefore have been considered in the assessment. You can find the embedded mitigation measures in the notes part for relative slides. The second category is the subsea noise, and the impacts in construction phase is the effects of subsea noise during construction from pilling of wind turbines and substations at Hornsea 4 on marine mammals and fish are expected to be key potential impacts and will be assessed further within the EIA. And the commissioning phase impact is from removal of infrastructure and shall be further assessed during the EIA. The mitigation of impacts will be built into the subsea noise modeling from pilling soft starts, where an impact pilling hammer starts at a relatively low blow energy before progressively increasing how hard the foundation is struck. The soft start procedure will be a key mitigation for minimizing the potential impacts on sensitive receptors. The third category is the fish and shellfish ecology. In construction phase, the project activity and impact is that mortality, injury, behavioral change, and auditory masking arising from noise and vibration. Its minor magnitude and medium importance. Its likely significant effect is that on the basis of potential subsea noise arising from pilling activity and the presence of sensitive species within the Hornsea 4 study area. The fourth category is marine mammals. In the construction phase, the project activity and impact is the disturbance from pilling noise. It has minor magnitude and medium importance. Its likely significant effect is that evidence from telemetry and acoustic detection data at previous offshore wind farms show animals are displaced during pilling but return after pilling ceases. In the commissioning phase, the project activity and impact is disturbance from underwater noise. It has negligible magnitude and medium importance. Its likely significant effect depends on the method used to remove structures. Methods such as hot cutting, diamond wire cutting, and abrasive water jet cutting are all expected to have negligible impact due to low noise levels and the temporary nature of the impact. Let's move on with the fifth category. It is the offshore and intertidal ornithology. In the construction phase, Disturbance or displacement impact can be occur due to construction activities within the area associated with foundations, and wind turbine generators may lead to disturbance and displacement of species within the array and different degrees of buffer surrounding it. It has negligible to minor magnitude and negligible to high importance. Its likely significant effect to be not significant to minor depending on species assessed. This is due to any potential impacts being minimized, especially to a small number of foundations and wind turbine generators at any one time, and temporarily due to the construction phase being limited in time. In the operation phase, there is a collision risk. Seabirds flying through the area during the operational phase are at risk of collision with wind turbine generator rotors and associated infrastructure. The result of such collisions may be fatal to the bird concerned. It has negligible to moderate magnitude and negligible to high importance. Its likely significant effect to be between not significant and moderate, as initial consideration of collision risk highlighted as key consideration for the Hornsea Farm project. Risk resulting from in-combination effects with other offshore wind farms is greatest. The sixth category is marine archaeology. In the operation phase, score effects caused by the presence of wind turbine generator substation foundations and the exposure of inter-array and export cables or the use of cable protection measures, impacting archaeological receptors and exposing such material to natural, chemical, or biological processes and causing or accelerating loss of the same. It has moderate magnitude and very high importance. Its likely significant effect is potentially significant without secondary mitigation. Currently, on the broad locations of non-wrecks and obstructions are available, with the position and extent of the marine archaeological resources at Hornsea not yet established. Let's move on with the seventh category, which is commercial fisheries. In the construction phase, the project activity and impact is Hornsea area construction activities and physical presence of constructed wind farm infrastructure, leading to reduction in access to or exclusion from established fishing grounds. It has fleet-dependent magnitude up to moderate, and it has also fleet-dependent importance up to medium. Its likely significant effect is to be negligible to minor adverse significance, depending on fleet assessed. Potential for some loss of fishing opportunities over construction periods, though effect is short-term and localized, and the operational range of fleets is typically not limited to the area. The category 8 is shipping and navigation. In construction, decommissioning, and operation phase, the project activity and impact is increased contact risk. Presence of wind farm construction traffic increases the risk of contact between navigating vessels and array structures. It has moderate magnitude and medium importance. Its likely significant effect is additional structures which have not been fully commissioned increases risk of contact with project and transiting vessels. Vessels will divert around the array with little transition through. In operation phase, the project activity is fishing gear snagging risk with cable. The impact is cable is snagged by fishing gear, and it has minor magnitude and medium importance. Its likely significant effect is fishing along the cable route could lead to snagging. Category 9 is aviation and radar. In the operation phase, during operation, wind turbine generator in coverage areas of air defense radar systems could shield the radar from genuine targets of interest in wind turbine generator, induce radar clutter. A degree of shadowing could be created behind detectable wind turbine generator. Any of these potential effects could impact on the air defense control ability to provide a safe and efficient service to aircraft and successfully utilize the radar data to monitor UK airspace from airborne threats. It has moderate magnitude and high importance. The area is potentially within the operational coverage of the Birmingham and Breezewood air defense radar systems. Wind turbine generator potentially detectable by air defense radar systems, which would cause wind turbine generator-induced radar clutter. The last category is infrastructure and other users. In operational maintenance phase, interference with the performance of the radar early warning systems located on oil and gas platforms can be happen. Its magnitude dependent upon platform location proximity and the characteristics of the radar early warning systems. Its potentially high importance where the performance of a radar early warning systems is significantly affected. The presence of the Hornsea foreign turbines in previously open sea has the potential to cause significant interference with the performance of radar early warning systems located on oil and gas platforms. There are several platforms with radar early warning systems in the vicinity of the Hornsea 4 area, which have the potential to be affected by the wind turbines within it.
Environmental baseline offshore. In this section of the presentation, we will describe environmental components that characterize Hornsea 4 area. There is a huge amount of environmental components that can be described in this area, but for time reasons, we will just mention the principal ones. Fish and shellfish ecology. A total of 84 fish species are found in this area, some of them which are commercially important. The key fish and shellfish within the storage area are identified as follows. Species of within cod and dab, pelagic species of herring and sprat, benthic shellfish, species of brown crab and lobster, elasmobranch species of lesser spotted dogfish, migratory species of Atlantic salmon, trout and European eel, and many others. As shown in this image, spawning grounds for other species coincide with the Hornsea 4 array. However, these are generally part of a far larger spawning area that covers large parts of the southern North Sea. Marine mammals. The following species of marine mammals have been identified most likely to be present at Hornsea 4, and these are harbor porpoise, white-beaked dolphin, minke whale, harbor seal, and gray seal. As we can see in the picture, the key issue for marine mammals is that Hornsea 4 is located in an important area of harbor porpoise. In addition, the surveys suggest highly seasonal occurrence of both harbor porpoise and seal species within the Hornsea 4 array area. Subsea noise. Noise sources within Hornsea 4, other than those that are naturally occurring, arise primarily from shipping and the oil and gas industry. Marine geology, oceanography, and physical processes. The environmental baseline for physical processes relates to the seabed geology and superficial sediments, the tidal and not tidal influences, this is water levels, currents, and sources, also waves and suspended sediments. As we can see, the majority of the area of interest is an area of relatively deep water. This is between 30 and 50 meters, which limits wave steering influences on the local seabed. And in this illustration, we can see that the average of suspended particles in this area is very low. Offshore and intertidal ornithology. According to studies, the key species in this area include fulmar, gannet, great black-backed gull, herring gull, kittiwake, puffin, razorbill, and guillemot. This image is an example of the abundance of the species, in this case guillemot and the kittiwake, in the area that will occupy Hornsea 4. Shipping and navigation. The key shipping and navigation activities that may be impacted by Hornsea 4 are large commercial shipping, Newcastle to Amsterdam ferry route, fishing activity, inshore recreational activity, and short commercial vessels, and oil and gas activity. In these two illustrations, we can see the cargo vessel drugs and the fishing vessel drugs that, as we can see, have an important concurrence in the Hornsea 4 area. Environmental baseline onshore. In this part of the presentation, we will describe some of the environmental components that characterize the onshore area of the project. These will include ecology and nature conservation, land use and agriculture, and historic environment. Ecology and nature conservation. the Hornsea 4 onshore area, there are the presence of at least 8 protected species. These are bat, breeding bird, wintering bird, otter, water vole, great crested newt, reptiles, and badger. This image represents the statutory ecological designations within 1 kilometer of the onshore scoping boundary. As we can see, this area includes some sites of special scientific interests and even a local nature reserve. Land use and agriculture. One of the key environmental characteristics in the onshore area, and as we can see in this picture, is that agricultural land within this area comprise Grade 2 and Grade 3 quality land. These are considered the best and most versatile agricultural lands. Historic environment. The study area contains numerous non-designated and designated heritage assets. Some of them are Church of All Saints, medieval complex at Harmstone Old Hall, the Skipsea Castle, the Church of St. Andrew, and the Rothsey Medieval Settlement, between many others.
Hello, I'm Ganesh Vasant Sankude and I'm going to throw some light on the topic methodology of the impact assessment which was used in this Hornsea 4 project. So we can see in the figure it covers the three broad sectors which are principles, approaches and tools. It details the important EIA laws, policies and assistance. It describes several EIA approaches. Furthermore, it gives some information about the impacts, consequences, prevention and significance. It gives the description of the interrelated effects assessment approach. Last but not least, it mentions the environmental management, which is a key factor. It gives the broad principles of methodology that will be adopted for the Hornsea 4 environmental impact assessment. It describes the approaches that will be used to identify, evaluate, and mitigate potential likely significant environmental effects and the tools that have been used to deliver proportionality in this process. For example, impact register. So, I will start with the important EIA laws, policies, and assistance. These policies and regulations for the EIA were regulated by one of the directives, which is 2011/92/EU. I'm gonna give few examples of the articles from this directive in order to get a bird's eye view of the content of this article. The EIA is a process required under the terms of this Directive 2011/92 as modified by the Directive 2014/52 on the assessment of the environmental impact of such public and private ventures. Article 1 of the directive sets out the purpose of the EIA to determine the environmental consequences of public and private projects which are likely to have a significant environmental impacts. In addition to the directive, the legislation and the applicable policies, the EIA will be conducted with reference amongst others to the documents such as, for example, Advice Note 3, version 7, EIA Consultation and Notification, Planning Inspectorate, August 2017. The next point is EIA approaches used in this methodology. The first one is general approach. There are 4 steps involved in this approach, which are pretending impacts, finding magnitude, importance, evaluation, and finally to the report impacts. As stated by the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment IEMA 2017, the provision of proportionate EIA is a core concern for the UK's planning and consenting framework and for developers who are trying to move forward with the projects. Adopting this direction from IEMA, providing the required EIA for Hornsea 4 would be a progressive operation that has begun with the scoping and will continue through the evidence plan process. Now we are going to see impacts, consequences, prevention and significance. To assess the impacts, there is a specified impacts register. So the question may arise how it's done. So the impacts register is an Excel spreadsheet containing the columns listed as we can see in this table. The impact registry helps users to sort and filter the impacts and consequences that are most important to them. For example, it may be filtered to reveal either the impacts that may occur during the construction or those directly relevant to the installation of an onshore export cable. As a consulting platform, stakeholders will be able to review the impacts contained in this registry and settle on the proposed standard of the assessment. Let's turn to the next point, effects. As set out in various commonly used methodologies, for example, DMRB, Road and Bridge Construction Manual, most of the technical topics will determine the possible relevance of the effects, as the level of effect will be determined by considering the magnitude of an impact together with the importance and the value of an affected resource or receptor and its sensitivity to the impact. This concept is cleared in this diagram. So, as we can see, a degree of effect of the moderate or more would usually be deemed to be a major effect. A degree of influence of less or less minor would be called not significant. Let's move to the next part, which is mitigation. Mitigation strategies shall be developed to prevent, mitigate, eliminate, or remedy any negative effects found and to generate or to improve positive effects such as environmental and social benefits. All are implemented on the basis of hierarchy outlined in this figure. In this context, mitigation steps are taken to include design measures, which are primary mitigation, and building activities, as well as management measures, which includes both secondary and tertiary preventive measures. In the case of effects that are originally assessed to be a major significance, a design adjustment is typically introduced to prevent, mitigate, or eliminate them, followed by a reassessment of the significance. This strategy takes note of the technological and financial viability of the preventive steps. The degree of importance assigned to the residual effects is linked to the weight that the EIA team feels should be given to them when making decisions on the particular project. Effects of moderate or higher significance are perceived to be significant for decision making, warranting close attention to ensure conditions for mitigation and control by using the most suitable steps. Results of minor significance or fewer can be called to the attention of the decision makers, but may usually be defined as warranting little, if any, weight in the decision. Mitigating will generally be completed by the standard public practices. For example, construction. Now I would like to talk about the specific interrelated effects assessment approach used in this methodology. The interrelated effects evaluation examines the possible significant effects of the various impacts of the proposed development on the single receptor. For example, combined noise and air quality may have a larger effect on the residential receptor than any impact considered separately. The interrelated effect assessment approach will be proceed through the following key steps. First and foremost, it involves identification of relevant receptors from the assessment of significance of effect sections. Second steps combines identification of the impact source pathways that can affect the receptor and identification of the environmental statement section where those pathways are described and assessed with the identification of potential effects on those receptors group through the review of assessment sections. Thirdly, the production of the interrelated effect assessments utilizing tables listing all potential effects on selected receptors during the construction, operation and maintenance and decommissioning phases. Now we are going to see other environmental impact assessment aspects, which are human health and major accidents, which were considered in this EIA report. The first one is human health, which is a vital aspect which influences EIA. It covers the environment, employment and income, education, lifestyle, physical activity, amenities and social aspects, connectivity, community identity and access. The second one is major accidents. It is compulsory for environmental impact assessment to concern the expected serious consequences resulting from the susceptibility of the proposed construction to major events or disasters that are important to this development. The key areas of the development vulnerability derive from its maritime operational conditions, coastal erosion at landfall, and flood risk at lowest level at the substation. In addition to the unique mitigation steps defined with each environmental issue, Hornsea 4 would comply with the General Environmental Management Standards. Under the Construction Regulations 2015, the management of Hornsea 4 will include general environmental health and safety requirements. It is no longer a formal requirement for the developers to produce a site waste management plan. Nevertheless, it is recognized that construction, operation, and demolition stages all have the potential to create waste. The applicant will adopt good construction and management practices to ensure the waste is minimized as far as possible. So that sums up my description of the methodology part and which concludes my talk for the today. I thank you very much for your attention. That's all from my side.
Hi, my name is Niusha. In this section, I'm going to talk about potential environmental effects onshore and mitigation measures to tackle them. As you can see on this tree, the potential environmental impacts onshore are shown here. The list starts from geology and ground conditions, traffic and transport, noise and vibration, ecology, nature conservation, landscape and visual assessment impacts, historic impacts, land use and agriculture, hydrology and flood risk, socioeconomic characteristics, and air quality and health impacts. The objective of embedded mitigation studies is to better understand the role of mitigation and its importance in an EIA process. Basically, mitigation means the reduction of something harmful or the reduction of its harmful effects. It's important in an EIA process to first identify the impacts, the harmful impacts throughout the project, and to later on avoid them or completely remove them or reduce them um, as much as possible. As part of the project design process, in this project, a number of design and measures have been proposed to reduce the possibilities of potential of each of these environmental impacts that we're going to talk about. Throughout this report, the EIA process has systematically identified the impacts first and then taking into consideration the mitigation measures that Hornsea 4 has already adopted. These mitigation measures include both avoidance, best practice, and design commitments. There are three stages to mitigation measures. Basically, the mitigation measures are classified into three stages. The first one is called primary mitigation, which is basically methods to avoid occurrence of disease. The second type would be secondary mitigation measures. These are methods to diagnose and treat existing diseases in early stages before it causes significant morbidity. And the third type would be tertiary mitigation measures. It is methods to reduce negative impacts of existing diseases by restoring function and reducing their complications. In addition to the specific mitigation measures that are identified for each of these environmental impacts, Hornsea 4 will conform to general environmental management practices under the construction regulation 2015. Hornsea's CEMP or COCP will include general environmental and health and safety considerations. One of the first impacts to point out to would be geology and ground impacts. Some of these impacts would be sterilization of future mineral resources, encountering contamination during intrusive works, or dewatering of trenches and excavations. Since I don't have enough time to talk about all of these in details, I'm just going to talk about a few of them. For example, encountering contamination
During intrusive works, one of the embedded mitigation measures against it would be CO 77. That refers to it's a tertiary embedded measure, and any contamination encountered during the construction phase would be subject to appropriate risk assessment, and if necessary, either removed, treated, or mitigated as part of the project. The magnitude would be small, potentially medium, and the importance would be likely to range from low to high. And some of the scoped out impacts would be damage to the coastline and impacts on coastline erosion in the construction phase, or exposure of workforce to health impacts in the construction phase again. And there are only two measures scoped in for the hydrology and flood risk impacts. First one would be access across watercourse, happens during the construction phase. The embedded mitigation measures for this one is access routes will be designed to avoid high value watercourses. Where avoidance is not possible, bailey bridges or other crossing structures may be required on a temporary basis. The magnitude of this impact is small and the importance is high. One of the proposed approach to this scoped in impact would be a simple assessment approach, which would be adopted involving an assessment of the likely physical impacts on the channel banks and riparian vegetation. A few examples for the scoped out impacts would be exposure of workforce to health impacts and construction phase, and changes to current drainage and water infiltration ground at the substation site, which happens in the operational phase. Impacts on ecology and nature conservation are also quite a few. For example, impacts on breeding or wintering bird species is one of them, happens in the construction phase. The mitigation measures are CO2, CO7, and CO26. For example, CO2, for example, CO7 refers to the construction working area that will be typically 80 meters working width along the underground cable route to minimize the construction footprint. Other crossings may also expand this default to create an 80 meters, and the permanent width will be 60 meters. This is one of the embedded measures. Magnitude would be low, importance would be ranging from low to high, and two of the scoped out impacts would be impacts on protected species and impacts on habitats or species in the operation phase. Another area that can be impacted and affected by this project would be landscape and visual impacts. One of these impacts would be temporary effects on landscape and viewers of the onshore substation sites, and permanent effects on landscape and viewers of the onshore substation sites. For example, in temporary effects of the construction phase, mitigation measures would be primary CO2, CO49, CO 128. For example, CO 49 would refer to that there will be no permanent high voltage infrastructure installed above surface within 50 meters of residential properties and subsurface within 25 meters of residential properties. And some of the scoped out impacts would be temporary effects on landscape and viewers of marine works, permanent effects of landscape and viewer of marine infrastructure that happen in the operational phase. For the impacts on historic environment, there were no measures proposed for the scopes in impacts. For example, indirect impacts on designated heritage assets or direct impacts on non-designated heritage assets happening in the construction phase, or direct impacts on non-designated heritage assets on decommissioning phase. The magnitude of all these scoped in measures impacts would be no change to large, and the importance vary from medium to high or low to high, and it's pretty varying. The scoped out impacts for this topic would be direct impacts on designated heritage assets, construction phase, or direct impacts on designated heritage assets in the decommissioning phase. Impact on land use and agriculture, for example, would be impacts on recreation and amenity in construction phase. The embedded mitigation measure that was proposed is CO 124, which is a tertiary mitigated measure. It's an adoption of an agreed construction code of practice to minimize temporary disturbance to residential properties, recreational users, and existing land users. The magnitude would be medium, the importance would be medium, and a simple assessment will include a desktop review of recreational resources which are likely to be affected. And the scoped out impacts would include temporary disruption, permanent disruption, reduction of land, and temporary disruption, reduction in land. Impacts on traffic and transport are also quite a few. One of the interesting ones would be impact on driver delay on locally significant roads, which happens in the construction phase. The mitigation measures proposed for it is a primary CO1, which is an all natural water courses, including main rivers and ordinary water courses, main roads and railways, will be crossed by HDD or other trenchless technology where technically practical. The magnitude would be medium, importance would be medium. Some of the scoped out impacts would be impacts from transport of offshore project components on the road in construction phase and severances. Noise and vibration impacts are also quite a few. One of the interesting ones would be landfall, nearshore, and intertidal areas, temporary noise and vibration from cable installation. The mitigation measure offered for this one is code of 134. This one refers to it's a primary mitigation measure. The cable installation works and the landfall area will be located at least 200 meters from noise sensitive properties. The magnitude of this would be small to large, and importance would be high. Some of the scoped out impacts would be noise from buried cables, operational traffic noise, and go on. For the quality impacts and effects register, all the impacts have been scoped out. There are dust generation, exhaust emissions from facilities, and dust generation in the decommissioning phase. In the cumulative effects, project plans and proposal with which Hornsea 4 may have cumulative effects have been provisionally identified and screened. These effects are identified as those effects on a receptor that may arise when the development is considered together with other existing or approved projects. There is widely no accepted definition of the indirect effects. It's mostly confused with secondary effects. However, in the 2017 EIA regulation, they distinguished the two. By secondary in this report are those effects that are taken to be part of a chain or impacts or effects that can be readily traced back to an action of Hornsea 4, and indirect effects may be partly the consequence of an action of Hornsea 4 but occur much later in time or much farther removed in distance, but they are still reasonably foreseeable. Indirect effects may include the consequences of economic or population growth induced by a project and other effects related to induced changes in the pattern of land use, population growth rate, related effects on air, water, and soil and ecosystems in general. In the context of Hornsea 4, indirect effects falling within this definition are likely to be scoped out, since the project will not lead to long-term changes in population or the pattern of land use and the consequent effects of these. And there are two processes to this cumulative effect. One is screening, the other one is assessment. In the screening, the southern North Sea offshore wind has been screened, and the assessment part is the tiered approach. Examples of these effects would be potential effects of the setting of the same scheduled monument. It could be effects with regard to the permanent loss of agricultural land and the substantial area would be effect on land use and agriculture. Other would be during construction operation. Nearby receptors could be affected by noise from Hornsea 4 and from Other developments, impacts on air quality would be dust generating activities will be managed during construction using standard practices and are therefore considered to not contribute to any cumulative effects. And impacts on traffic and transport would be integrally assessed as a matter of course in transport assessment by including future growth of traffic flows due to general increase in road use by residents and businesses. To conclude, in this presentation, we have examined a case study on EIA for an offshore wind farm project Hornsea 4 in England. We firstly mentioned about the project's features, then we identified the main aspects of the offshore and onshore environments likely to be significantly affected by construction, operation, and decommissioning of Hornsea 4 together with the cumulative effects. After that, we have talked about the environmental baseline of the project and the methodology of the impact assessment. And lastly, we mentioned probable implications and mitigation measures.